forward. Let's start there with the panel. Let's bring in our panel. Fox News contributor Hugh Hewitt, Democratic strategist Adrian Elrod, and Tom Bevan, Real Clear Politics co-founder and president. Okay, Hugh, it seems like as we get more details of this, it includes some small pockets of Greenland to build a military base. And as you heard Lucas Tomlinson earlier in the show, the Golden Dome and the prospect of that is a big part of this effort.
I think it's been a breakthrough week, Brett, for getting the understanding of what Golden Dome is and why we need it. I am reminded, and I'm glad Lucas put it in the piece, not just the Gorby-Reagan summit in Reykjavik, where Gorby wanted to kill SDI, but 1983, when President Reagan did an Oval Office speech announcing the Strategic Defense Initiative. He was roundly mocked. There were lots of jokes about Star Wars. But he kept at it, and because he kept at it, Israel was able to turn back, with the help of the United States and allies, via Iron Dome and via interceptors that we had, a fusillade of ballistic missiles from Iran. That's what Golden Dome is about, and the breakthrough this week, the breakthrough Lucas, I think, underscored, is we absolutely have to have Greenland's participation in that, and I think Ruta told you, and he told the president, it's going to happen. That's good news for the world, especially for America.
For all of the oxygen that this story has stirred up, and obviously there's a lot of criticism, Adrian, about how the president talked about it at the beginning, the threat of possible military action that he took off the table once he got to Davos. It's possible that the whole thing works out much better than anybody thought.
I mean, sure, Brett, anything is possible, but the bottom line is he is certainly President Trump along the way, along this journey of trying to perhaps get to the point where we're simply trying to have the U.S. is trying to have a stronger military presence in Greenland. He's alienated our NATO allies. He's really frustrated, especially the leaders of Denmark and Norway and some of the other surrounding countries because of his approach. I mean, it's not typical that the United States goes after a sovereign country and tries to take their land. So, look, again, Brett, at the end of the day, if we have a stronger military presence in Greenland, I certainly understand the geopolitical aspect of this and where this is geographically and why that's important. Great. But the approach and the tactics and the strategy that he's deployed has certainly caused a lot of strife for Americans.
Tom, you look at polls all the time. Do you think that this focus on international diplomacy, on international moves, has hurt the president at all domestically?
Well, I mean, look, there was a New York Times Santa poll that came out today. Trump's approval on the economy was net negative 18 points, and on cost of living, it was net negative 29 points. And I think, and I've said this before, Brett, I mean, just think about the last month. I mean, it's been all about Venezuela. It's been about Greenland. He's been at Davos. He's had meetings with Bibi Netanyahu and Zelensky. He's done one speech on the economy. That was in Detroit. And even that message got a little bit muddled by the tiff that he had with a guy there on the factory floor. So I do think that every minute he spends on, it's not to say these issues aren't important to America and our national security and all of that, but as far as the domestic political concerns go, with an midterm election coming up and Republicans looking to try and convince Americans that the economy, Trump just complained about the fact that he had bad PR people the other day. He is the PR guy. He's always been the PR guy. He's got to sell this. In his first term, he had meetings with truckers and welders and labor unions and all of that. He hasn't done any of that thus far, and we'll see whether he kicks that into gear moving forward.
But that said, Hugh, I mean, you look at the numbers, the growth in the third quarter now at almost 4.5%, projected for the fourth, that was the third quarter, the fourth quarter up to 5.3 according to the Atlanta Fed, and they're looking at over 6% in Q1 for growth, with inflation kind of staying where it is.
It's extraordinary. Vice President Vance gave a speech in Toledo today before he went up to Minnesota, and he laid out these numbers. They are extraordinary numbers. The wages are catching up with Biden inflation and are going to pass Biden inflation this year. It's going to be a boom year, and I'm not worried about November until June. By June, the president's got to be focused like a laser. Right now, he's got to be focused on world security. His number one job is to protect the nation. He's doing that very well, and I think he's also bringing peace to the Middle East. Some voters will ignore that. A lot of voters won't.
Meantime, up on Capitol Hill, the former special counsel, Jack Smith, getting grilled by Republicans, one of them Representative Gill from Texas. Take a listen.
How many days after Kevin McCarthy was sworn in as Speaker did you subpoena his records?
I don't recall, but those two things had nothing to
It
do
was
with one.
16 days after becoming the highest-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. You subpoenaed his toll records. Do you agree that that might reasonably be considered a violation of the speech or debate clause?
I do not, and I want to be clear that the toll
You were
records...
collecting months' worth of phone data on the Republican Speaker of the House, the leader of the opposition.
So a lot of focus, Adrian, on the efforts to get phone records of Republican lawmakers. They're talking about the Speaker, but others, senators and congressmen. What did you make of this hearing today?
Yeah, first of all, I think Jack did an incredible job. He was very forthcoming, very direct. And Brett, he made it very clear that he would have taken the same type of procedures if he was going after a Democratic or if he was investigating a Democratic president as he would President Trump as a Republican. I think it's important to note also when it comes to the records that you were just showing in that clip, no one was wiretapped. It was simply who did President Trump call? What lawmakers did he call during this period? And that's what was collected. So it was not the actual content of the conversations. It was the actual collection of determining who was called. And that was part of a standard DOJ investigation.
There's a lot of takes on this, Tom, and Republicans think he has a long history of being biased in his investigations. Obviously, a different take than Adrian.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't understand the purpose of was a single mind changed today about anything that was said or done up on Capitol Hill? Republicans already had their view of Jack Smith and what he did. Democrats had their view, and they just spent a few hours, yelling at each other. I'm not sure that this changed any minds out there whatsoever.
Hugh, final word.
I think Jack Smith effectively killed the appointment of special prosecutors today. I think Eileen Cannon's decision that she ruled his appointment unconstitutional has been validated. He did not give answers. He gave evasions, and I believe that will go down as one of the worst appearances before a congressional history, other that I can actually remember in real time.
Strong letter to follow. Okay, panel, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.